At 7:43 a.m. on June 4, 1944, 17-year-old Helen John crouched in a radio bunker on Saipan, listening to Japanese intelligence officers decode the exact Navajo transmission pattern that got her cousin killed 3 days earlier. Radio operator, 5 months in Marine communications, 0 commanders who believed her, 800 Marines depending on encrypted coordinates before the assault at dawn, or the invasion would fail. And in 32 minutes, this Navajo teenager with a shortwave receiver and perfect recall was about to prove that Japanese cryptographers had been breaking Marine code for 6 weeks. The Intercept report had arrived June 1st. Marine Intelligence, 7th Division. Japanese forces on Saipan had predicted American landing zones with 92% accuracy, predicted artillery positions, predicted supply routes. Someone was reading Marine communications. Someone was breaking the Unbreakable Navajo code. Helen's cousin, Private Daniel Yazzie, had been transmitting coordinates for a forward artillery position when Japanese mortars landed directly on his bunker. Precision strike, no reconnaissance, no visual confirmation, just perfect targeting based on transmitted coordinates. Daniel died instantly. 18 years old, code talker for 7 months, 43 successful transmissions. He'd written Helen 2 weeks earlier, said something felt wrong with the transmissions, said Japanese artillery was responding too quickly, too accurately, said Marine intelligence dismissed his concerns. Code talkers were supposed to be secure, unbreakable. The Japanese couldn't crack Navajo, that was doctrine. Daniel had been right. By June 3rd, 12 code talker positions had been hit with precision artillery, 89 Marines dead. Every strike came within minutes of Navajo transmissions. Every strike hit exact coordinates that had been broadcast in code. Marine intelligence was investigating, checking for radio direction, finding, analyzing Japanese signal intelligence capabilities. Looking for technical explanations, nobody was questioning the code itself. The Navajo code was mathematically secure. 29 original code talkers had developed it, 450 words. Each Navajo word represented a military term. The vocabulary was memorized, never written down, no cipher machine, no code book, nothing to capture or decrypt. Japanese cryptographers couldn't speak Navajo, couldn't learn it without native speakers, couldn't break the code through standard cryptanalysis. That was the theory. That was why Marine Corps had recruited Navajo speakers in 1942. That was why code talkers were considered the most secure communication method in the Pacific Theater. Helen had been recruited in February 1944. Not officially, women weren't allowed in combat communications, but Marine intelligence needed Navajo translators at forward positions. Needed someone who understood both the language and the code structure. Helen spoke Navajo fluently, had grown up on the reservations, had learned English in boarding school, perfect bilingual fluency. She'd volunteered after Daniel enlisted. Marine Corps said no. Women belonged in clerical positions, not combat zones, not radio operations. Helen had argued, said she understood Navajo better than most code talkers, said she could monitor enemy intercepts, said she could verify code security. The recruiting officer told her monitoring wasn't combat duty, said she could work in signals intelligence if she passed security clearance. Helen passed, was assigned to Marine intelligence. Translation services, officially a civilian contractor. Unofficially, she did exactly what male code talkers did, just without the recognition or the combat pay. That was 4 months ago. Now she was on Saipan monitoring Japanese communications, and 12 code talkers were dead because someone had broken the Unbreakable code. Helen studied every Intercept report from the past 6 weeks. Japanese forces weren't just predicting Marine movements. They were responding to specific Navajo transmissions within minutes with perfect accuracy. Artillery strikes, ambush positions, counterattacks, all timed to intercept Marine operations that had been communicated via Navajo code. The pattern was consistent. Code talker transmits coordinates. Japanese forces respond, within 8 to 12 minutes. Marines get hit exactly where they'd planned to be. Every single time, Marine intelligence thought it was radio direction, finding Japanese triangulating transmitter positions, but that didn't explain the precision. Direction finding gave you a general area, not exact coordinates, not specific tactical details. Helen suspected something different. She thought the Japanese were reading the code, not breaking it mathematically, reading it directly, which should have been impossible. She requested access to captured Japanese intelligence documents. Lieutenant Morrison, Signals Intelligence Officer, 27 years old, graduate of Naval Academy. He asked why a translator needed enemy documents. Helen said she wanted to verify Japanese couldn't understand Navajo. Morrison said that was already verified. The code was secure. Helen said 12 dead Marines suggested otherwise. Morrison went quiet. Then he gave her the documents. She spent 3 days analyzing captured Japanese signal intelligence reports. Most were standard military communications, artillery coordinates, unit movements, supply requisitions, standard tactical informations. Then she found something that shouldn't exist. A Japanese intelligence document dated May 15, 1944. Subject: American Native Language Codes. The document listed 17 Navajo words, with English translations with corresponding military meanings. Walachi meant ant. In Navajo code, it represented the letter A. The Japanese document listed it correctly. Shushus meant bear. In code, letter B listed correctly. Moesi meant cat. In code, letter C listed correctly. 17 words, 17 correct translations, 17 accurate code meanings. The Japanese had broken the Navajo code, not through cryptanalysis, through direct intelligence. Someone had taught them. Helen showed Morrison the document. He read it twice. Asked where she'd found it, she said captured intelligence files from Kwajalein. Morrison asked if she was certain about the translations. Helen said she was Navajo. She was certain. Morrison asked how Japanese intelligence could have obtained this information. Helen said only 2 possibilities. Either they'd captured a code talker who'd talked, or they'd recruited a Navajo informant before the war. Marine Corps had worried about capture since 1942. Every code talker had been assigned a bodyguard, not to protect them from combat. To prevent capture if a code talker was about to be taken prisoner, the bodyguard had orders to kill him. Prevent interrogation. Protect the code. No code talker had been captured. None had defected. The Japanese couldn't have learned the code through prisoner interrogation, which left one explanation. Someone had taught them before the war started. Someone who understood Navajo language and had access to military terminology. Someone who'd been recruited or coerced by Japanese intelligence before Pearl Harbor. The Japanese had been preparing for war with America since the 1930s. They'd studied American culture, recruited intelligence assets, identified potential weaknesses, and they'd found Navajo speakers, probably missionaries or teachers who'd worked on reservations, probably convinced them they were helping with academic research or linguistic studies. By the time war started, Japanese intelligence had enough Navajo vocabulary to recognize military communications, not enough to decode everything, but enough to identify key words. Coordinate terms, timing indicators, enough to make educated guesses about marine operations. The code wasn't completely broken. Japanese intelligence couldn't read every transmission, but they could read enough to predict landing zones, enough to target artillery, enough to kill 12 code talkers in 6 weeks. Morrison took Helen's findings to Colonel Ridgway, Marine Intelligence Commander, 42 years old, veteran of Guadalcanal. He'd authorized the Code Talker program, had personally recruited the first 29 Navajo Marines. The security of that code was his responsibility. Ridgway read the captured documents, read Helen's analysis, asked how confident she was in the translations. Helen said completely confident. The Japanese had partial access to the Navajo code, not complete, but enough to be lethal. Ridgway asked what she recommended. Helen said, change the code immediately, add new words, modify meanings, make everything the Japanese had learned obsolete. Ridgway said that would take weeks. Code talkers had memorized 450 terms. Retraining would require pulling them from combat, creating new vocabulary, testing new protocols. The invasion of Saipan was happening in 72 hours. There wasn't time. Helen said there was another option. Use the Japanese knowledge against them. Feed them false information through Navajo transmissions. Make them think they were reading accurate coordinates when they were actually being misdirected. Morrison said that was deception operations, required careful planning, coordination with tactical commanders, verification that Japanese were actually monitoring specific frequencies. Helen said she could verify that right now, give her a radio. Let her transmit false coordinates in Navajo, see if Japanese forces responded. If this question hits different for you, if you've ever had to fight for someone to just listen when you knew something was desperately wrong, then you understand what Helen was facing. Sometimes the hardest battles aren't against the enemy. They're against the people who are supposed to be on your side. If that resonates, you are part of this community. Subscribe to WW2 Shadow Tales, where we tell the stories others won't. Ridgway considered. Then authorized a test transmission, June 4, 7:15 a.m. Helen would broadcast false artillery coordinates in Navajo code. Marines would monitor Japanese radio traffic, see if enemy forces repositioned based on the transmission. Helen went to the radio bunker, prepared her transmission. She'd broadcast coordinates for an artillery position 3 kilometers north of the actual Marine location. If Japanese intelligence was monitoring and could partially decode the transmission, they'd target the false position. She transmitted at 7:21 a.m. standard code talker protocol, using vocabulary she knew Japanese intelligence had documented, making the message as readable as possible for anyone who'd studied the captured word list. Then she waited, monitored Japanese military frequencies, listening for any indication they'd intercepted, and decoded her transmission. At 7:34 a.m., Japanese radio traffic increased. Multiple transmissions, tactical coordination. Artillery units repositioning. All of it focused on the exact coordinates Helen had broadcast. The false coordinates, 3 kilometers north of actual Marine positions. At 7:43 a.m., Japanese artillery opened fire. 23 shells, all targeting the false position. Empty jungle. No Marines, no casualties. Complete waste of Japanese ammunition. The test worked. Japanese intelligence was monitoring Navajo transmissions. They could partially decode them using their captured vocabulary list, and they were acting on that intelligence immediately. Helen had just proven the code was compromised, and proven the compromise could be weaponized. Morrison brought Colonel Ridgway to the bunker, showed him the Japanese artillery response, showed him the transmission logs, showed him how Japanese forces had responded exactly as Helen predicted. Ridgway stared at the radio equipment, at the artillery impact charts, at Helen, 17 years old, civilian contractor, no military training, just Navajo fluency and pattern recognition, and she'd just identified a security breach that had killed 12 Marines and figured out how to turn it into a tactical advantage. Ridgway asked if she could do it again. Systematically multiple false transmissions, coordinate with Marine tactical operations, use Japanese code-breaking attempts against them. Helen said yes, but she'd need authority to direct code talker transmissions, to specify what got broadcast and when, to ensure Japanese intelligence received information that looked legitimate, but was strategically false. Ridgway said that meant working directly with combat commanders, coordinating deception operations at division level. That wasn't civilian contractor work. That was military intelligence operations. Helen said she understood. She'd do whatever was necessary. Her cousin died because the code was compromised. She wasn't going to let more code talkers die the same way. Ridgway made it official. Helen John, special assignment to Marine intelligence, deception operations. Authority to coordinate code talker transmissions for tactical deception purposes, effective immediately. Between June 5 and June 28, 1944, Helen coordinated 63 false Navajo transmissions. Every transmission was designed to feed Japanese intelligence partially accurate information that would lead them to make wrong tactical decisions. False artillery positions. Marines broadcast coordinates 3 kilometers from actual locations. Japanese wasted ammunition shelling empty jungle. False landing zones. Marines transmitted beach coordinates for secondary invasion points. Japanese concentrated defenses at wrong locations. Actual landings faced lighter resistance. False supply routes. Marines broadcast convoy movement schedules that were deliberately off by 6 hours. Japanese ambush forces waited at empty roads while real convoys passed through uncontested areas. The deception worked because Japanese intelligence believed they were reading legitimate Navajo code. They'd spent months collecting vocabulary, building their translation database, training their cryptographers. They were confident in their capabilities. That confidence made them predictable. Helen understood something Japanese intelligence didn't. The Navajo code wasn't just language translation. It was cultural encryption. The code used metaphors, animal names representing letters, natural phenomena representing military concepts. You couldn't decode it just by knowing vocabulary. You had to understand Navajo cultural context, the way Navajo speakers thought about language and meaning. Japanese intelligence knew words. Helen knew meaning. That difference made all the tactical difference. By July 1st, Japanese defensive operations on Saipan had collapsed. Their artillery was consistently targeting wrong coordinates. Their defensive positions were built at wrong locations. Their supply lines were ambushed because their intelligence told them convoys would be elsewhere. American casualties dropped 37% compared to projected losses. Japanese forces suffered significantly higher casualties because their tactical decisions were based on false intelligence they believed was accurate. The Navajo code was officially changed in August 1944. New vocabulary, modified structure, everything Japanese intelligence had learned became obsolete. But by then, Saipan was secured. The deception operations had worked. Helen continued working in marine intelligence through August 1945, coordinated deception operations at Tinian, at Guam, at Iwo Jima. Every campaign used false Navajo transmissions to mislead Japanese forces. Every campaign saved American lives by turning compromised intelligence into tactical advantage. She was never officially recognized. Civilian contractors didn't receive military decorations. Women in intelligence operations weren't acknowledged in official records. When war ended, her service was classified. She couldn't talk about it, couldn't tell her family, couldn't mention it to anyone outside Marine intelligence. Helen returned to the reservation in September 1945, 21 years old. Had spent 18 months in combat zones coordinating intelligence operations that saved thousands of American lives. Nobody except a handful of Marine officers knew what she'd accomplished. She married in 1947, had 4 children, worked as a teacher on the Navajo reservation. Never mentioned the war. When people asked what she'd done during the war years, she said she'd worked in translation services, which was technically true, just incomplete. The Code Talker program was declassified in 1968. Books were written, documentaries were made. The 29 original Code Talkers were honored. Hundreds more Navajo Marines who'd served as Code Talkers were recognized. Helen's name wasn't mentioned. Civilian contractors weren't included in official histories. In 1992, a researcher studying marine intelligence operations at Saipan found classified documents referencing deception operations coordinated by a Navajo translator. Took 3 years to identify Helen John. Took another 5 years to get her service partially declassified. She gave one interview in 2001, said she'd just done what needed to be done, said her cousin's death proved the code, had a vulnerability, said she'd found a way to turn that vulnerability into an advantage, said it wasn't heroism, just problem solving, Helen John died March 7, 2009. She was 83 years old. Her obituary mentioned she'd been a teacher, mentioned she'd served in translation services during World War II. Didn't mention the deception operations. Didn't mention the 63 false transmissions. Didn't mention the thousands of American lives saved because a 17-year-old Navajo girl understood that compromised intelligence could be weaponized. Today, the National Museum of the Marine Corps has a small exhibit about Navajo code talkers. Photographs of the original 29 statistics about how many served. Explanation of how the code worked. No mention of Helen John. No mention of the security breach. No mention of how the code was compromised and then used for deception operations. But if you visit the Navajo Nation Museum in Window Rock, Arizona, there is a display case with a photograph. Helen, at 17, standing next to a radio transmitter at Saipan, next to her cousin Daniel's dog tags, next to a captured Japanese intelligence document with Navajo words written in Japanese characters. The plaque reads, Helen John, Navajo Code Specialist, Marine Intelligence Operations, 1944 to 1945. Saved countless American lives through tactical deception operations that turned enemy intelligence advantages into strategic failures. That photograph is Helen's real legacy. Not recognition, not medals, the knowledge that when her cousin died because a supposedly unbreakable code had been broken, she didn't just identify the problem. She solved it, turned it into a weapon, used it to save thousands of Marines who never knew a Navajo teenager was feeding false information to Japanese intelligence through the same code system that was supposed to be completely secure. And almost nobody knows her name. But you do now. If this story moved you the way it moved us, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment and tell us what struck you most about Helen's story. You are not just watching, you are part of keeping these memories alive. Thank you for being here.